Welcome to 5-Minute Math. This is Carrie Rhinehart. Today I'm going to be looking at solving radical equations. If you're following along in the book, this is from Algebra 1, Unit 5, Lesson 7. Again, we're going to be looking at radical equations. Okay. And radical is a square root or a cube root or fourth root, mainly square roots, but we're going to look at square roots. We're also going to look at cube roots. Okay. Remember, square root means what number can be multiplied by itself twice to give you that value that's under there. And cube root is what number can be multiplied by itself 3 times to give you the value under there. So when we're solving these radical equations, there's a few steps, if you like steps. First one is to isolate the radical. Okay. If it's under the radical, it stays with it, but anything that's on the outside of the radical needs to move to the other side. Then you need to square or cube, depending on what it is. If it's a square root, you square both sides. If it's a cube root, you cube both sides. Okay? And the reason is that if you square a square root, they cancel out. Okay? But what you do to one side, you've got to do to the other. Okay? And then you solve for the variable, and then, of course, you always check. Plug that value back into the original equation and check. So let's go ahead and do an equation. So an example would be the square root of x plus 4 equals 10. Okay. I'm going to draw my vertical line through my equal sign. Remember, what we do to one side, we need to do to the other. First step says to isolate the square root. Well, that means we need to get this by itself, which means we need to get rid of that 4. To get rid of that 4, I need to subtract it. And what you do to one side, you've got to do to the other. So we're going to subtract that from both sides. Cancels out over here. We're left with the square root of x on the left-hand side and 6 on the right-hand side. So that radical is by itself now. So step 2 says to square both sides. This is a square root, so we need to square both sides. So I'm going to go ahead and square both sides. And the whole point here is that when you square a square root, they cancel each other out. And we just get x equals, well, 6 squared means 6 times 6, which is 36. All right, and then the last step is to check. So I'm going to plug that 36 back into the original equation where there's an x. So I'm going to square root of 36 plus 4 equals 10. Square root of 36 is 6 because 6 times 6 is 36. And 6 plus 4 equals 10. That is a true statement. 6 plus 4 does equal 10. So that we know that 36 is the correct answer here. All right, let's look at another one. Let's say that we have 17 equals 1 minus 4 times the square root of 2x plus 3. We need to get the square root by itself, so we need to get this by itself. I need to get rid of the 1 and that negative 4. We need to go ahead and get rid of the 1 first, so subtract 1 from both sides. And we end up with 16 equals negative 4 times the square root of 2x plus 3. And now to get rid of the negative 4, we divide by it because it's negative 4 times that square root. So divide both sides by negative 4. And we end up with negative 4 equals square root of 2x plus 3. Okay. Now, when you take the square root of a number, you can never get a negative. So it's not possible to get a solution here. I can't take the square root of anything and get negative 4. But let's say that you kept going. At this point, you'd square both sides so that these cancel out. And negative 4 times negative 4 is 16 equals, and then you get 2x plus 3. And then we just keep solving, so I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. And I get 13 equals 2x. And then last step would be to divide by 2. So I get x equals 13 halves. But when you go back to plug this in, 17 equals 1 minus 4, 2 times 13 halves, plus 3. Well, 2 times 13 halves is 13, and then 13 plus 3 is 16. So we get 17 equals 1 minus 4 times the square root of 16. So that gives us 17 equals 1 minus 4 times, well, the square root of 16 is 4. I'm going to come up here. So we get 17 equals 1 minus 16. Well, that is not true. 17 does not equal negative 15. So there is no solution here. No solution. And then just keep in mind, if you're solving these with cube roots, instead of squaring both sides, you would have to cube both sides, which means raise it to a power of 3.